UFC.
The UFC has become
UFC.
The UFC.
Today, the UFC has become one of the greatest fight organizations in the world. You've seen thousands of fights, spectacular events, and unforgettable moments. But none of it would exist without one night, one battle, and two warriors who put everything on the line. This is the story of how a dying sport was resurrected by sheer will and courage. This is the night the UFC was saved. In the twilight of an era, when the lights of the UFC flickered on the brink of extinction, two warriors emerged from the shadows to wage a battle that would determine the fate of mixed martial arts. The year was 2005. The UFC was wounded, teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Audiences had dwindled, investors had lost faith, and the organization struggled to stay afloat. Events no longer attracted the general public. In fact, many still saw MMA as a barbaric spectacle, far from a legitimate sport. In this dark context, a last hope arose, The Ultimate Fighter. This reality show promised to open the doors to a new generation of talent and perhaps save the UFC from financial ruin. Dana White and the Fertitta brothers, desperate to keep the organization alive, gambled everything on this project. If it failed, the dream of taking MMA to the world would crumble. Among the participants in this experiment were Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonnar, two men with very different journeys, but a ferocious hunger for success. Griffin, a former police officer who had found salvation in MMA, was a technical fighter with incredible endurance. Bonnar, on the other hand, was known for his indomitable spirit and his ability to withstand seemingly impossible strikes. Neither of them could imagine that they were about to make history. The reality show progressed, episode by episode, with its physical and emotional trials. Griffin and Bonnar stood out from the beginning, earning the respect of their peers and the growing audience. Finally, both made it to the grand finale. April 9th, 2005. The Cox Pavilion in Las Vegas was ready to host a night that would change everything. The lights came on, and amidst a mix of nerves and anticipation, Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonnar entered the octagon. The atmosphere was charged with electricity. No one knew that what was about to happen would mark a turning point in the history of MMA. The first round began with an explosion. Griffin came out aggressive, throwing punch combinations that quickly found their target. Bonnar responded with a brutal counteroffensive, landing punches that would have dropped anyone else. But Griffin didn't back down. Both fighters refused to yield, fighting as if their lives depended on it. The second round was even more intense. Bonnar landed a knee that opened a cut on Griffin's face, but instead of slowing down, Griffin seemed to feed off the pain. He responded with a flurry of punches that forced Bonnar to retreat. The audience, initially quiet, was now completely captivated. Every punch echoed like thunder, and every move made the arena vibrate. The third round was pure war. Both fighters were exhausted, but they didn't slow down for a second. It was a display of unyielding will, a testament that the heart of a warrior can surpass any physical limit. Griffin landed low kicks that staggered Bonnar, while Bonnar countered with a right hook that shook Griffin. When the final bell rang, both men embraced, drenched in sweat and blood. The audience stood up, applauding endlessly. No one in the arena could believe what they had just witnessed. It was more than a fight. It was an epic battle, a masterpiece of endurance, technique, and human spirit. The live broadcast experienced something unexpected. Subscription lines began to collapse. Thousands of new viewers, fascinated by what they had seen, called to ensure they wouldn't miss more of the sport. The UFC, which had been on the brink of the abyss, began to glimpse a future. Dana White, aware of the impact this fight would have, made a historic decision. Both fighters, regardless of the official result, would receive UFC contracts. This wasn't just a fight, it was the fight that changed everything. White declared later, revitalized by this moment, the UFC began to grow by leaps and bounds. New investors came, events sold out, and the general public began to recognize MMA as a legitimate sport. Griffin and Bonnar became living legends, symbols of what it means to never give up. Years later, both reflected on that night. Griffin, with a smile, said, "I didn't know that fight would change the world. I just knew I didn't want to lose." Bonnar, for his part, added, "It was our moment. We were fighting for something bigger than ourselves, even if we didn't know it at the time." The legacy of that night was etched into the history of MMA. Every new fan who falls in love with the sport, every fighter who steps into the octagon, does so under the shadow of that epic battle. Griffin and Bonnar proved that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit can shine with blinding intensity. On December 22nd, 2022, the MMA community suffered a devastating loss with the passing of Stephan Bonnar. Forrest Griffin, his eternal rival and friend, summed up what many felt. We lost a true warrior, a man who gave everything for this sport. I'll always miss you, brother. The fight between Griffin and Bonner was not just a fight, it was the rebirth of a dream, the salvation of a sport, and the ultimate proof that when everything is on the line, true warriors rise.